This is a video about the time Chicago sold its streets to Morgan Stanley. The year was 2008. Breaking Bad just came out.
Get off the toilet!
Michael Phelps just won 8 gold medals at the Beijing Olympics. And America was entranced by the meandering nonsense of Jason Mraz. It was a simpler time, but it was about to get hit by a financial crisis. Don't ask me which country started it. I don't know. Let me take you there through the art of voiceover. Last time on Chicago! With the recession looming, the Windy City needed to find some cash to plug a $150 million sized hole in their city budget. They could raise property taxes, but Democratic Mayor Richard M. Daley knew that wouldn't be a very popular idea with the voters. Instead, he opted for a novel solution. They'd sell off the city's 36,000 parking meters to the highest bidder. What was he thinking? Chicago had previously privatized things like janitorial services, tax collection, and parking garages in deals known as public-private partnerships, and the results had been vaguely positive. See, cities have limited resources and manpower, and sometimes outsourcing a job like street resurfacing to a private company that already has a steamroller and a truck full of yellow paint makes a lot more sense than the city of Chicago buying a bunch of new equipment and doing it themselves. So Chicago put their meters up for sale in the form of a 75-year lease. Morgan Stanley crunched some numbers and decided to offer the city $1,156,500,000. Now, $1 billion is very cool. And since the majority of Chicago's meters were still charging 25 to 50 cents an hour, they weren't exactly a money-making enterprise for the city. At the time of the deal, the entire fleet of 36,000 parking meters was making just $20 million a year for Chicago. Now, you mathletes out there might be saying, hey, isn't 20 million times 75 years $1.5 billion? Now, that is technically true, you dorks. But getting $1 billion up front would allow Chicago to fix their budget, Mayor Daley could score some political points by keeping property taxes low, and they could invest the rest in the market so they could save some of that cash for a rainy day. Talk about opening the door to a bright future. Oh! Morgan Stanley was willing to part with $1 billion up front by getting some co-signers on board, including the Emir of Abu Dhabi, and they planned to make their money back by just jacking up the meter prices. Plus one or two tiny little details in the contract, Morgan Stanley, the city of Chicago, and the consulting firm William Blair hammered out the rest of the terms and then gave the city council 2 days to read through and approve the 150-page contract. When some city council members protested, they were reminded that they had already passed the city's 2009 budget that already included $150 million from the meter deal, and that any third-party audit of the deal or any other delay could put the city at risk.
This is a very difficult vote. I don't want it to happen. The budget is a difficult vote.
After only 24 hours of review, the city council approved the contract 40 votes to 5.
Ordinance is passed.
And so the deal went through. And when the dust had settled, one thing became abundantly clear. Chicago had beefed it. And hot diggity dog did Chicago get taken for a ride. When Morgan Stanley came in, they quadrupled the meter prices, extended the amount of times meters would be active, and reduced the amount of time you could park to just 2 hours. And then there were the true-up payments that Chicago had to pay back to Morgan Stanley. Oh yeah, one of the most insidious parts of the meter deal was that Morgan Stanley was basically guaranteed revenue. See, Morgan Stanley had the power to jack up the hourly rates on the meters, but Chicago officials had been promised that they could make adjustments if their constituents got too angry. But Chicago would have to make up the difference in annual payments back to Morgan Stanley. Want to close off a road for construction?
The city has to reimburse the parking meter company for any revenue lost because of road construction that blocks parking at one of its meters.
Planning a parade that goes through downtown?
By contract, those parking meters have to keep running to make sure that this company is making money.
Want to remove a space closest to the crosswalk so cars can see pedestrians who are trying to cross the street?
Why are you doing this?
Why are you even thinking this way?
For practically any changes to the meter status quo, Chicago had to pay. They had the option of adding new meters in comparable spots to offset the cost, but in a city that already has 36,000 meters, there simply aren't a lot of new comparable areas to put extra meters. Chicago also had to pay Morgan Stanley anytime more than 6% of people parked at the meters had disabled placards. See, in the state of Illinois, people can park for free with a disabled placard. Seems reasonable. But now that Morgan Stanley jacked up the meter rates and extended the hours of operation and paid parking, more and more people were either getting counterfeit placards from their friends who knew Photoshop or getting them legally through their doctor. In the first 5 years of operation, Morgan Stanley billed Chicago $75.4 million for their supposedly lost revenue due to disabled placards.